All right, so welcome to another workshop offered by the University of Kentucky and the Office of Work, Life, and Benefits. Today, we're going to be talking about building resilient relationships with our guest speaker, Rhonda Henry. She is one of our therapists over in our health and wellness side of our benefits and HR services. And we are very excited to have her to talk to us about this topic today. Thank you so much, Rhonda, for being here.
Wonderful. Thanks, Suzetta. I really appreciate you all having me. Relationship stuff, y'all, it's one of those things I just love talking about. It's certainly an area of interest for me, and I see a whole lot of clients with some issues related to relationship kind of come through the door. So I'm always very happy to talk about those proactive ways that we can not just respond to those relationship problems that come up because we will all have them, trust me, but how do we proactively invest in relationships? How do we prioritize the things that are important to us? So I'm hoping to get to touch on a few things related to that this morning, or I guess now at noon. One thing, and Zeta may have said this and I may have blanked out, but you all will get the slide deck after this. So you'll have these materials. Toward the end of the slide deck, you will see a lot of links. I've got some slides with some good resource stuff on them. So you'll have access to those things and you'll be able to review the material again if you want to be able to do that. As we're talking today, just so we're kind of all on the same page about what we're talking about, when I'm referring to relationships, I'm encompassing all types of relationships. So I think sometimes our default goes to romantic partners, and certainly this stuff applies to romantic partners, but it also applies to our friendships, our family relationships, coworkers, colleagues. So lots of different relationships. You will hear me use examples as we go through, and I might use a partner example or a best friend example, but that doesn't mean that those same kind of general ideas and skills can't apply in lots of those situations. The things that we're going to cover today and kind of focus in on is looking at where some of the challenges pop up in relationships. What are some things that we can do around, especially boundaries and communication, both to sort of set a healthy parameter, a healthy space for ourselves and our person we're in relationship with, and using some of those other things to kind of overcome some of the challenges. We really then want to look at ways that we can either connect or reconnect with folks. And one of the things that I want us to especially do toward the end is kind of combining how do we see the challenges and then what choice we make about how to connect with each other. So that's what's sort of ahead over the next, 30, 40 minutes as we talk about this. All right, so let's look at some of the common challenges here. And y'all, I'm not gonna talk about every single one of these. Some of these are self-explanatory and don't necessarily need a lot of words from me as part of it. But there's a couple that I want to give a little more detail around. Um, certainly within the common challenges, I would say probably the top one is stuff related to communication. And whether that is a lack of communication, or if I had more space in my little block, I might have been more detailed. Lack of communication or kind of mismatched communication, thinking that we're getting our point across and we're really missing each other. Thinking that we've expressed ourselves and we're still leaving our partner in the dark, or our friends in the dark. So really looking at those communication challenges, and that's where I think getting into some of the things we're going to talk about will hopefully point us toward that a little bit. How do we express ourselves? How do we set boundaries? How do we connect, and where communication plays into all of those things? The other area that I see come up really frequently is this idea of being in these different life chapters. And I would say, in general, that one tends to press more on friendships and some family relationships. And those life chapters might be, somebody's moved away and kind of left their hometown to come to Lexington for a job, or they've started school. Somebody's maybe gotten, engaged or married, or they've had a baby. Somebody is moving toward retirement. Somebody else is early in their career. Like, just these really big, different life chapters that we go through. And it's not necessarily that I think a lot of us have an intention of, rejecting the people close to us, but it's just that we kind of drill down in that area. For folks that are getting close to retirement, they're really thinking about that. That's kind of what they're looking at. They're looking at things through that lens a little bit. So when we get in those different chapters, even when we want to remain close, sometimes sort of the natural flow of things makes there be a little bit more of a challenge or a little bit more distance. And so putting a little more effort into reconnection can be helpful. And then overcoming old baggage was the other one I wanted to kind of touch on. All of us are going to have some baggage. I mean, I hate to say it, but I think it's just the truth of walking through this world. We have our experiences that we take with us, and we might have processed them or made sense through them, or worked on them. But even then, it still is one of those lenses that we look at things through. So whether the baggage we bring in is stuff that comes from our family of origin, maybe I saw my parents fight about money all the time, and with my partner, I'm really struggling to have those money conversations. Maybe our old baggage is in our own relationship with our partner. So maybe it's, we've had a maybe infidelity in our history, and we're trying to overcome that and come back together. Maybe it's old stuff from other partners. I've got maybe an old partner situation that it was really painful or I felt was really difficult for me to manage. And I'm bringing those expectations in, with my new person, really thinking about what does our baggage look like. We could do a whole hour on that. Where's our stuff coming from, and am I managing it? Am I taking care of my stuff so that it's not inadvertently causing more distance or more of a wedge between me and my partner or my friend, whoever I'm thinking about in that relationship. So we've got lots of challenges that can pop up. Again, some of these are really obvious and kind of easy ones to sort of take in. I would encourage you to think about this, to maybe have a relationship or two in mind that you're in, and thinking about where you run into some challenges. It may not be a huge one, it may not be something that derails it, but when you find friction coming up, with your partner, in a friendship, with a family member, where are those areas? Just kind of keeping that in mind as we go through, because I think it'll help with some of the other things we're going to talk about to figure out how to maybe use some of those tools effectively. All right. So there's a lot of words on this slide, y'all. Like, I know that. This is a lot to take in and read. I'm not going to read every word to you. All right. What I want to start with around this one, though, is I think we as a culture talk a lot about red flags. That language has become much more common. I think, even in the last 10 or 15 years, when I was starting in my field 30 some years ago, it wasn't as much what we were hearing at that point. And I think that's become more common to hear about red flags, typically related to romantic partners. That's usually what I hear most frequently. And I would suggest that we kind of expand our thinking a little bit around this and really think about this in terms of, what are the green flags? What are those behaviors that give me that indication that this is somebody who I can be in a healthy partnership with, that I can have a good friendship with, I can feel respected with, and I can trust? What are those red flags? What do those mean, and how do they show up, and what do I need to be attuned to? And who, y'all, for me, that third column over there, which is those personal pitfalls. Where are those areas that I might see those things, but I maybe struggle? I struggle to set a boundary. I struggle to be clear in my communication. I struggle to not want to swoop in and fix a situation. Where are those things that for you personally will kind of hook you in some of these? So let's touch on a couple of the highlights kind of in that red and green flags. I really think the green flags, again, there's lots of examples in each of those bullets there, but I think the green flag side to me is really rooted in mutual respect, this idea of reciprocity. We've each got kind of responsibilities. We can each have, we should expect trust from each other, expect safety from each other. We should be able to have mutual communication, open communication without judgment. So it's really rooted in that mutual respect, and emotional safety and physical safety. One of the things, and I'll mention this at the end again, but one of the things that we're not going to have time to go into today is when there's any sort of violence or abusive situations happening. We don't have time to adequately cover it in the time we've got today. But I've got some resources at the end if you or anybody is in any sort of dangerous situation. In terms of these red flags, green flags, though, we're kind of looking at, again, which things give us that signal that maybe this is a healthy direction and maybe there's some issues we need to deal with. I think looking at those red flags, you have a lot of issue or a lot of points there where there's an imbalance of power, where maybe there's words, condescending or belittling words or behaviors. We may feel bad about who we are. I think that's one of the real just core ones in kind of red and green flag ideas. How do you feel at your gut? When you're with this person, whether it's your friend, your partner, your family member, are they draining the energy out of you? Are they helping fill your cup back up? Do you feel seen when you're with them? Do you feel safe with it when you're with them? Those are such big pieces, I think, for us to look at. And then really thinking about some of those personal pitfalls. Like I mentioned, do you find yourself seeing some patterns in relationships? Are you drawn to folks that maybe need a little more support, and you kind of come in as the saver of the day? Do you find yourself making choices in alignment with your values? If you're really working on, I don't know, maybe making some bigger life goals, you've gone back to school, or you're saving money, you're doing some of those things. Are you with friends? Are you with a partner that belittles that, or kind of sabotages some of those things? So really noticing from these, again, with all the information I'm putting out, noticing which ones resonate for you. Is there one or two of those that you might need to pull out and think about a little bit more? So let's talk about communication. As I said, communication is such a root both of challenges, but also the way and path that we get to resolution of so many of those things. This is one of my favorite quotes. The single biggest problem in communication is the illusion that it has taken place. And that's what I find so often. Folks feel like I think I said what I needed. They didn't seem to hear me, or we tried talking about this and we just couldn't make any progress. I think many of us recognize communication is important, but it's sometimes hard to to sort of put it in action or to make some adjustments that feel meaningful. So let's talk about a couple of ways that we can strengthen communication. And again, in some of these bigger slides, I'm going to touch on some points in there that I think are more kind of relevant or rise to the top for me. So I think one of the things that's worth consideration is thinking about what method works well for you. So whether that's, for some couples, I may make suggestions that they do kind of a weekly meeting or they get together on a routine basis to talk about things that are maybe a little more difficult to talk about. If it's, other folks that you don't live with, does it make sense that we're calling each other? Are we texting each other? Are we talking in person? We all know those pitfalls of electronic communication. We know we aren't getting body language, we aren't getting tone of voice. For some folks, though, we've got long distance friendships or long distance partnerships, and that's what works. So, thinking about the method, what you prefer, what you all kind of lean toward, and does it work? Do we need to tweak that a little bit? Are we better to do a FaceTime call, so we can actually see each other a little bit as opposed to just doing texting, especially if something's getting more complicated in a conversation. But I really think looking at those methods of communication can be a beneficial place just to, again, see if that needs a little bit of tweaking. I like this idea. That's why I put it on here of setting aside time for like a text or chat storm. All that means is that we kind of cluster together and maybe we're texting or messaging with a couple of folks in a chunk of time. So, I know for me, when I get home during the week, I'm not really feeling very social. My job is really social. I talk to folks all day. I like doing that. But when I'm done at the end of the day, I'm kind of quiet and I'm kind of more in my own space. If I'm wanting to connect with my social folks, my people in my own circle, I'm usually doing that on the weekend. So maybe I take an hour on Sunday and I kind of settle in and I have a snack and I've got two or three conversations going and I'm really connecting and reaching out to my friends or my family members that I haven't talked to in a little bit. But if you find that you find yourself sort of having that intention to connect with folks, but time gets away from you, I was too tired, there's never enough time to do it, think about putting a specific spot in your calendar. Okay, I'm going to take this 30 minutes, Saturday morning, and before I get up and doing chores, I'm going to send a few messages out to folks and check in on my people. Thinking outside the box a little bit, again, as I mentioned a second ago, we know the pitfalls with electronic communication. We know it can be challenging at times. I will say though, there's other circumstances, and depending on what's going on with our people and what our preferences are, where texting, even with folks that we're living with, can be a good thing. I'll tell you now, like when my son is now, an adult living out on his own, but when he lived at home, we texted all the time. We might be in just different floors of the house. It wasn't necessarily a huge important conversation. A lot of times it was silly things we were sending each other, jokes. But it was really important to me during that window of his life, that those last couple of teenage years when he was at home. I really wanted to keep that connection. I really wanted to make sure that we had fun communication, easy communication. And that was a low key way to do it. So again, that worked for us. I'm not saying it works for everybody, but it can be useful to do some of those things or look outside the box a little bit. Couples journaling is another one. I may send that with the materials I send with the Zeta. If you've never looked into that, if you're wanting to get closer, especially to your romantic partner, and struggling to kind of get over the hump of saying some of the things you want to talk about, sharing a journal can sometimes be another kind of way of doing that. But that idea, just again, breaking out of the norms a little bit. If we're getting stuck in some situation, is there a different way we can approach it? Even if we both decide, yeah, we tried that for a few weeks, it wasn't for us, but we're still trying. We're working together as a team to figure this out. And then that sort of navigating challenges, like there's so many challenges that come up in communication. I mean, again, I'm endlessly fascinated by it. And also, just like everybody else, struggle with it at times. I think that one of the things that I hear so much from my clients who come in who are struggling around this is just their own fear and uncertainty. I'm not sure how to do this. I can't get my thoughts into words. I can't make myself say this thing. My partner looks at me and they want an answer and I just don't even know what to say. Or, the other end, I'm talking a lot, but I cannot get them to participate. I'd really try to engage my friend or my mom or whoever it is we're struggling with, and they just won't participate. I think that fear and uncertainty is, I think sometimes I see folks get really hard on themselves. Why do I feel this way? Or this should be easier. And I would just say for any of time that we are trying to strengthen relationships in our life, these are folks who are important to us. Like that feels like an obvious thing. But because they're so important, we don't want to inadvertently hurt them. We don't want to risk, what if this makes something worse between us? What if this causes a bigger rift? And so the stakes are high. And that's why we want to give it that time and attention it deserves. We want to be thoughtful, but not to the degree that we become sort of the deer in headlights and we can't get over the hump of actually doing the thing. So taking a time out is one of the things that can be really useful. And all that means is if we find ourselves in conversations that are escalating, we're either kind of getting lost a little bit in the details, we're sort of losing our train of thought or our point. We might find emotions are getting really big. It can be really helpful to step away, just to do a small time out. And especially with folks that you are kind of routinely maybe working on relationship stuff with, our partner especially, having just a conversation on the front end, being able to say, I know sometimes when we talk, things can just feel like they get real big, or one of us needs a little bit of space to get our thoughts together. Can we just agree that like it's okay to take a time out? It's okay to step away for a second. And having that conversation on the front end before we're finding ourselves in a difficult point can really help just to sort of de-escalate the emotion a little bit. If we do the timeout, part of what we're wanting to do when we do that step away, it can be easy to sort of get pulled into thinking of I'm going to get my argument together, I'm going to get my thoughts together so that I can go back in and sort of win this argument. What I would really encourage you to think about though during those timeouts is it's the space to try to quiet emotions, to try to calm emotions, not quiet it necessarily, but to try to get emotions back into a regulated place. So it's the time to go take some deep breaths, go walk around your house for a minute, go get a cold drink, try to bring that emotion down, trying to settle the body down a little bit. And if that's one that resonates, I would really look toward things like, even meditation practice, that sort of thing, doing some breathing exercises to try to bring that physical response down a little bit. Because when we do that, we can think more clearly, we can express ourselves more clearly, and a huge one, we can hear each other more clearly. Because that's a big part of that communication challenge is we get so in our own emotions, we get so caught up in our own body's response, our own, worry or nervousness about it, that we're not really even taking in and listening kind of to what's going on from the other person. All right. So with that in mind, let's talk for a minute about active and reflective listening. So, I think one thing that we want to keep in mind, I think sometimes we think about listening is like, well, of course I know how to listen. I'm a human in this world and my ears are working. And so I'm able to listen and I'm able to be present. And I think one thing to keep in mind here is this is a skill set. I teach in the College of Social Work as a side gig. I'm teaching my students how to do this. Like it is a skill set to actively be present to someone because often, in this culture, we are often just waiting for our chance to talk. We're waiting for our chance to get our point in or give our response. So when we're able to slow this down, we're able to be in that more reflective space and cued in, it's going to help us understand each other better. It's going to quiet some of that emotional distress. It's going to bring us closer together. We're able to, kind of focus on that emotional support instead of jumping in with opinions and solutions. Because I know I'm not the only person on the Zoom today who has been in that space where all I need is somebody to listen to me for a few minutes, just to hear what I've had going on or what I'm thinking about. I don't need a solution. I don't need you to jump in and fix it. I just need you to listen. Okay. So if we can recognize that need, then we also want to show up for our people in that way. When we're trying to build that skill, some of these feel obvious, some of them might take a little more practice, but paying attention, putting down our phone, you all know, I don't even have to go there. We know how much the phone can get in the way of that communication. Listening without interruption, really listening and being attuned and taking in what's being said. Sometimes that's not easy. Some of these conversations can be really tender, they can be difficult. Seeking understanding, when you're asking questions, help me understand this more. I really want to understand your point of view. Help me see, I can tell you're really distressed by this, or this has been really hard on you. Help me understand some of that. We're listening for those nonverbal cues, being attuned to body language, paraphrasing and repeating back what folks say. Even just these simple things, they are so powerful. I hear this from my social work students all the time, just how powerful this is in building connection. When you're able to say things like, gosh, I hear that I really hurt your feelings when I said that the other day. We're not trying to solve anything, we're just acknowledging what we're hearing and being patient. I think active and reflective listening is just rooted in patience. We are not jumping in to get through this as fast as we can. So often the discomfort is such, we don't want to sit in it. I don't want to feel this way. I want to get to resolution. Just let me say I'm sorry. Just let me explain what was going on. That's the intention often behind it. But what ends up happening is it feels like we're shutting the other person down. It feels like we're not taking time to just sit with what they're telling us. So this skill set, if that resonates for you, this might be an area that you want to practice in some. Just really try to turn up the volume a little bit on that attunement. So let's talk about boundaries. I think boundaries are an area that for a lot of folks bring some feelings of maybe uncertainty that people sometimes, when they come to me to talk about this, I get a whole lot of versions of, I feel like I should be setting better boundaries, but either I don't really want to, I don't know how to, I'm not sure I can, it feels really scary, I've never seen it. And what I would say, most of us, we need boundaries. I mean, to be in this world, we need to be able to know I can protect myself, I can protect my space. Those boundaries don't have to be at the expense of other folks. Really healthy boundaries are rooted in me taking care of me. And I think one of the struggles I hear a lot is folks feeling like boundaries are selfish, or boundaries don't take into account the other person. Maybe they're rejecting the other person. So let's talk through a couple of components of this. And again, lots of words here. I'm going to hit some highlights. But the boundaries are really this idea of we've got sort of guidelines for what's okay and what's not okay. We're going to get in a couple slides. We're going to get to some examples because I think this is much easier to think through when you see some examples. That purpose of boundaries is honestly to bring us closer. And I know that might feel sort of anti sort of what you think of when you think of boundaries coming up. Often when we think about boundaries, we're picturing sort of the big concrete wall. I'm going to put these big limits and I'm not going to let you in. I'm going to keep you over there and I'm going to stay over here. And sometimes that's the case. Sometimes folks in our lives we need separation. We need big distance from folks. But healthy boundaries with people that we are in loving relationships with really are intended to bring us closer. If I can express what I need, if I can let you know something makes me uncomfortable, something, that you do I really like, or something else makes me feel, distant from you. If I can express that and I can trust that you can hear that, man, we get a lot closer. We get a lot closer to each of us getting what we need. It's also a way of helping us avoid some of those resentments and further upset. Because if I don't get to set a limit, if I've got, maybe I've got a difficult relationship with my dad and he's calling all the time. And when he's calling, he's just ranting and raving about stuff that I have no control over. And it's really stressing me out. What's going to happen is I see his call pop up. Am I going to want to answer that call? Am I going to be looking to get off that call as quick as I can? Yeah. And so if I can have some limits, whether that's in how long we talk, when we talk, what topics we cover, how you talk to me when we talk, if I can have some of those limits, then I can maybe do the phone call. Maybe again, I want to talk to my dad. I want to be close to him. Can we do a call? Well, yeah, because I know he gets it. We've talked about this, and I've set this limit on what that needs to look like. And it allows us to be ourselves, to maintain our integrity. How to set boundaries? It starts with that internal clarity, really thinking about what's going on that feels off track. And sometimes we need help with that, and whether that's talking to kind of a trusted friend about it, whether it's talking to somebody like me, sometimes, journaling or just giving ourselves a chance to kind of process and think about it, but really thinking about what is off track and what do I need to be different. And then being able to be as straightforward as we can. Again, this is really about me. If I'm expressing my boundaries, I need this. I feel uncomfortable. I like this. I don't like this. It's what I need. And I'm letting you know that. We're trying to stay calm. Again, this isn't about punishing the other person. If we have a conflict, we need to deal with our conflict. But this boundary is really just about kind of a guideline, how we're going to interact with each other. And sometimes it can be helpful to have a support system, having a friend, if you say, okay, I'm going to go have that conversation with my dad about these phone calls and how he's just kind of getting out of control on them, having that friend be there as a support, having them be somebody maybe we can process with on the other side of it. So when we think about that internal clarity, let's again use a couple of examples here. So if we use that, dad sort of, yeah, the dad example, what do I want out of the situation? I want to be kinder in the conversation. And again, this is assuming I want a relationship with my dad and I want to have some kind of conversation with him. So I want to be kinder in the conversation. That's my goal. And I want to maybe hold that boundary. What am I willing to do? I'm willing to feel uncomfortable. So maybe I'm a little worried at the beginning or unsure how it's going to go, but I'm going to answer the phone. I'm willing to be in the conversation. I'm kind of taking stock of myself. Do I feel okay to do this? Is there anything else going on for me? And where's that boundary? I know that maybe I'm not going to stay on the phone if I'm being cursed at. Maybe that's the one that I've set for myself. That might be overt with him. Maybe I've said to him specifically, it's upsetting to me when you do that. Maybe it's an internal thing and you've decided, okay, I'm good in a conversation with him until we get to this point. And if this happens, then I'm going to need to pull back from that. Right. All right. So let's think about for a minute the types of boundaries that we have here. And I'm going to kind of take that in for just a second. We've got these different kind of categories the boundaries can fall in. it doesn't make that much difference whether, again, you don't have to label it which one it is. The purpose of this is just for us to recognize there's lots of areas in terms of our interactions with folks and what impacts us that we might need to look at boundaries in. I think sometimes it's just easy for us to think of just certain, one thing. So it might be physical, well, I don't like people to come up and touch me. I don't like them to hug me without an invitation, or I don't like people to come touch my hair. Some of those kind of things might feel more obvious, but some of these others might be ones you've not really thought about before. That idea of sexual boundaries, for example, I think sometimes we think about that in terms of with our partners, what our limits are, what our preferences are, but this also can come up with our friends. Maybe you've got a friend who's really being, really coming in aggressively with wanting to know about your sex life or making jokes about that. That makes you uncomfortable. So just being aware that there's lots of different types of boundaries. These are just some of the, I think sometimes it's helpful just to think about some language. These are not, you don't have to use my words for these. But sometimes I find with working with clients, it's just helpful to have some way of how do I even try to get this into a sentence or try to kind of summarize what it is I need. So that's kind of why this is here, is just to give you some ideas of what those could sound like, and to kind of consider maybe again in your relationships are struggling, are there some boundaries that maybe need to be tuned up a little bit, and worked on. Okay. So when we think about kind of what's in my control, what's out of my control, this is again one of these boundary areas. It's really an internal boundary. This is me being able to say to myself, what am I focusing on? What's kind of my business and what's not my business. And so I like that this kind of gives some of those examples. It's my thoughts and actions, where I'm giving my energy, the goals I'm setting, how I'm spending my time, what's out of my control, what's going to happen down the road, the opinions of other people, what people think about me, the actions of other people, lots of things that are out of our control. It's not always easy to disengage from some of those, but I think for most of us, if we can really kind of, when we are struggling, if we can refocus to, in this situation, in today's, whatever the upset of today is, what's in my control, it helps us start to break it down into what's my next step. What do I do with this? So when we think about the what's in and out of our control, the other thing that I also like to kind of bring in or mention is this idea of the circle of concern, because I think that we know there are things that sort of fall in a gray area. They may not be in my control, but they certainly might impact my life, or I might have a little bit of influence over them. So that might be things, you all see, natural disasters, politics, God help us, what people think of us, the weather. Other things I would put in there if I'd written this might be, how my son's doing at his job, how my partner's health is, things about folks that we care about, we're concerned about, concern. But where we can really get off track with this, because it is normal to be concerned about other things that again have flow and impact in our life and for our loved ones. But where we can get off track is when our circle starts looking like that one on the left, where that circle of concern is really big and full. And that means we're giving a lot of energy to those things. We're kind of stewing in those things. Because if we're giving a lot of energy to those areas of concern that I've got real limited control over, very little, if any, I'm not giving energy to those things in the middle. How am I taking care of myself? What am I doing about me? If I'm so focused on everybody else's stuff, things that I really don't have much influence on or much control over, then what is left over for me to take care of my stuff? So I really want you to give some thought to this again. If this one resonates with you, it might be one to think about a little bit more, kind of dig into a little bit more. It's normal for us to have those concerns. It's normal for us to give thought and energy to some of those things outside of our control. But I think when we find ourselves kind of getting out of balance with it, it can cause kind of unintended strain, not just on us individually, but on those relationships. My adult son might not want me to talk about how he's doing at his job every single time we talk. So it can cause some other unintended issues when we're getting out of balance in this. All right. So in broadly, in most relationships, the things that you can control, the boundaries that you set, the way that you respond to situations, how much you prioritize the relationship, your communication, tone, style, approach, how you address conflict. No, we could do hours on conflict. All right, we know that. But how we and when we're addressing conflict, and the bigger question of whether we remain in the relationship. And let me just say here, that includes family. That includes family. Not all of our family members, I don't say that lightly, but not all of our family members are healthy for us in lots of ways. And so it is okay to have that be on the continuum of things that we decide is whether we stay in relationship with someone. All right. So how do we build that connection? When we're finding some of those challenges, we want to build connection. That is what we as humans are built to do. And so one of the things that I want to mention is I've got a few different ideas in here that I want to go over, but I really love this concept of bids for connection. This is not my concept. I will cite it on the next slide. We'll see where this came from. But this idea of bids for connection are just these kind of small attempts just to connect in the day to day, little small things that we say to each other and we do. And essentially they're like, I think of them like little fishing lures. You know, like I'm putting that out there and like, can I pull you in? Are you coming toward me if I put out this little bid for connection? And every time that we see these things put out there, you see the little bid examples there. You know, you want to watch the movie with me. How was dinner tonight? Those little everyday kind of things we say to each other, and we're hoping for some kind of response. You know, whether that's a laugh or an engagement, it doesn't have to be the biggest, most important thing, but it's these little small bits for connection. So let's talk through an example one for a second. So say that I'm talking to my partner tonight and I say, I gave that presentation today. I was really nervous. I kind of float that out there. If my partner's turning toward me, they might say, "Oh, really? Like that was today. Tell me how'd it go." So they're engaging. They want to know. They're in. So I'm feeling seen and heard. I'm right in the center of their attention, which is what I want in that moment. If they're kind of turning away from me, I might get that little bit of a brush off. Okay. Maybe they turn their head and look at me. Maybe I don't even get that. It's just kind of over the shoulder. Oh, okay. And there was a human response to what I said, but that's about it. I'm not getting any other kind of emotional engagement whatsoever. And then we have that idea of turning against, whether that's can't you see I'm working, or, thank gosh, I don't have to hear about that anymore. Some version of rejection that we get at that point. These small moments, y'all, and there's a reason I highlight these a lot because these are so, so, so important, not just with romantic partners, but in all of our relationships. I think it is so easy for us to get in that headspace of thinking about the grand gestures, especially with romantic partners. It's the big, anniversary trip we take. It's the, kiss on the Jumbotron. It's the, proposal in front of all our friends. And those are fun. Like those are good moments. Those can be loving, wonderful moments. But if we are only building our relationship like waiting for the next one of those, we're going to sit through a whole lot of lonely, disconnected days. All right. This concept comes from John Gottman, who is really to me the guru of relationship information, and a lot of the stuff at the end of the program or the slides that you'll be getting are a lot of his resources. Really good content. This piece just so sticks with me that Gottman followed newlywed couples over 6 years. At the 6 year mark, he noticed the couples who were still married were turning toward each other 86% of the time. Couples were divorced were turning toward each other 33% of the time. I'm going to tell you now, as a little newlywed, if you had told me this is the trajectory, you're going to have this much of a shot of sort of making it to 6 years versus this much of a shot, you better believe I'd be tuned into this a little bit differently. When you think about something you can carry away from here, I'm not kidding when I say, if there's one thing, it's this. People in your life, when you have those moments, those little moments, connecting, turning toward, seeing and hearing each other, it is the single biggest impact you can have on your relationships. I mean it. So I'm going to get off that soapbox. Important stuff, good stuff, and easy. All right, so practical connection ideas. So a couple of things here, and I really want to make some time for one more slide after this, then we're about done. Practical connection ideas can be really simple. This just, they can be big and complex. And if there's big, complex stuff you all want to do, you're training for some big marathon trip together and doing stuff, great, go do it. But if we're just looking for low key things, we don't have a lot of money, we're really tired, the world's exhausting us, maybe we just pick a TV show to watch together. Maybe you and your sister who live in different states just pick a book to read at the same time. We're looking for small ways to build connection, doing things like routine times to connect. So again, if we've got somebody who doesn't live close to us, or shoot, maybe they do live close to us and we just don't see them. When is a time we can see each other on some sort of routine basis? It just helps things not fall off our radar. We have good intentions in relationships and life gets in the way. We know that. Really setting aside space, whether it's a meal or other outings, where we have, no work talk or no kid talk, depending on what that relationship is, making sure that we don't let responsibilities and sort of to-do lists fill up all of our space together. We might need a little bit of that, okay, for 5 or 10 minutes, we're going to talk about this and catch up on this part. Now we're going to shift gears and we're going to talk about how am I doing and how are you doing? Team meetings, that's that idea, that State of the Union meeting that I mentioned. I'm actually just going to include a handout and what I send through Azetta for that, so y'all can read about that a little bit more if you're interested. I don't want to do it in injustice. I can't really cover it in the time we've got here, but I'll send a document about that if that's something you're wanting to explore. What I really want to get to, though, is connecting these two things. So the connections on the right here, let's see if I can do this at the same time, are the same as these. So these blocks are the right-hand column. The challenges are what we covered at the very beginning of the program. And what I really want you to think about here is how to connect the challenges you're experiencing with ways to connect with each other. So if you're finding yourself in a space where, let's see, maybe it's a disagreement about political or social issues, because that feels timely. Maybe that's coming up in some form in some relationship. If we're trying to build more connection, maybe we need some boundaries around that. That's another conversation. But if we're trying to build some connection, that might be a situation. If you look to the right, maybe we want to do something like working toward a common goal. Maybe we've got a house project and we're going to put some energy toward that. And we're going to talk about that. And that's going to kind of be our default thing that we go to. Maybe we want to go volunteer together or go take a class together. It gives us something else to talk about. It puts those political, social issues to the side a little bit so we can see, can we just go take our painting class and go learn to do this thing? Can we go figure out how to, grow a tree or whatever the thing is we're going to go do? But I really want you to think about where you see those challenges in your relationship, what kind of connection might help us get unstuck from that a little bit. And I think that's where we want to connect those dots, and looking at those opportunities. All right. All right, now we are at the resource pages. So again, you all are going to get this, but I've got a lot of stuff packed in here. As I mentioned, I've got some information in that lower corner about abusive relationships, and certainly I'm available if folks need any one-on-one support around anything like that. But we've got lots of good materials out there, whether that is podcasts, articles, so many good things. Lots of podcasts on this one. This one, we've got a whole lot of different articles, different sites that we can use for things. So again, notice what resonates with you, and then dig in just a little bit more in that area. For us, I'm part of a team of four full-time therapists here on campus. We are available to any employees as well as sponsor dependents. Everyone is available who works here. Everyone has available to them 5 free confidential therapy sessions. This can be used by you or your sponsor dependent. We do telehealth and in person, either one. We do individual counseling. I don't do couples counseling. We have lots of referrals for that, but I'm happy to talk with you on your relationship work. So, if you're wanting to figure out how to set boundaries or do those kind of things, those are the kind of things we're more than happy to talk with you all about. Everything we do is free and confidential, covered by benefits, but it's not part of any of your employee records. So we are siloed off in that way. I'm going to stop sharing here to see if we have any questions.